iZotope Vinyl is one of the most popular plugins out there, and if you use it, you might not be aware of the most useful features in it. Today I'm showing you guys what these features are, how to use them, and recommend when you should be using them as well. So let's get into it. Starting off, the most important and powerful feature in iZotope Vinyl is this year function down here. Now, as you guys can see, it's sort of labeled as if we're replicating the audio quality throughout the different years here, but what it's actually doing is something a little bit different. You can see when we open up an EQ and have this setting at 2000, this is the shape of our frequency spectrum. But you'll see as soon as I start turning this year dial down, something interesting happens with our frequencies. The lows as well as a little bit of the highs are getting removed from our sound, so essentially what's happening is we're removing some of the frequencies out of our sound. This is called bandpass filtering. Essentially that's what this year dial does. It's taking the lows and highs from our sound and removing them. You guys can see we introduced a lot more of the lows and a little bit more of the highs once we turn this back up. In my opinion, this is one of the more useful features in this plugin. You can easily put this on top of your sound or sample and remove a lot of the high-end polish of your sample as well as some of the cleaner bass tones. This is a technique that's very common in lo-fi music. I did a video a while back on my 6 tips for lo-fi beat making, so check that out if you're interested. This is a feature that you can use on all your sounds really, your samples, your drums, whatever you want, and you can control how extreme you want this effect to be. For me, I use this whenever I have a sample that's very dense and I want to clear away for some of the instruments I want to lay on top. If I want to include my own drums and my own bass, I'll put this on top and I'll just quickly remove a lot of the frequencies out. Next up in this plugin, we have a bunch of these faders up here. These are essentially noise generators. What they'll do is take our sample and essentially just add a layer of noise to them if that's something that we want. But to take you guys through these one by one, the first fader that we have here is mechanical noise. This is meant to mimic the sound of a turntable motor. This is primarily going to generate low-end noise more than anything, you guys can see. This would be useful if we had a section in our song or our beat that had a solo instrument playing, for example. This will provide noise that will cover a lot of our frequency range, just so when we have a solo instrument playing in our beat, it's not going to sound as cold and sparse playing by itself. Next up, we have the wear fader right next to it. This is meant to mimic having a wear on our record. Essentially what it's going to do is cut some of our high end in our sound and replace it with distortion. You guys can hear we had a reduction in the high end as well as a little bit of distortion there. The next fader is electric noise. This is very similar to a mechanical noise. The way this differs from mechanical noise is just purely aesthetically. This is going to introduce a very buzzy type of sound as if we're playing around with a preamp. The next fader here is dust. The way to use this is turn up the amount dial down here. The fader is going to control the volume of the noise that we're hearing, and the amount dial right below it controls how frequently this noise is going to play. So if we turn it up, it's going to be playing all the time, and we turn it down, it's going to be playing less frequently. Again, in my opinion, it doesn't sound all that great. I'd really recommend finding your own dusty vinyl samples and just putting those into your beats separately and not using this plugin to do this type of thing. The scratch fader right next to it, as you guys might have guessed, is going to introduce a scratching noise. Same type of concept. This controls the volume. This controls the amount of scratches. This to me is more of an aesthetic choice if you're trying to introduce these types of noises into a intro in a beat, for example. Honestly, I would not use this in a main sample in your actual beat. This has a very intrusive feel to it. Doesn't sound all that great either. I just recommend really just staying away from this dial overall. Next up, we have the warp dial right next to it. This is a very popular feature in iZotope Vinyl. In my opinion, it's a pretty great feature as well. You guys can hear what it does. Basically what it does is it plays around with the pitch of my sample. It's going to warp it up and down over and over again based on the different parameters that I set in it. Now how extreme the pitch of my sound is going to fluctuate depends on how high I put this warp depth fader. So here we have a regular sawtooth wave. Now if I turn the warp depth up, you can hear the pitch sort of going up and down, and when I turn it up even more, it goes up and down in pitch even more. In the area down here, the warp model area, this is where we control the shape of our fluctuation. You guys can see it goes down and up and down and up. If I set it to this pattern here, it's going to be very similar but go in the opposite direction initially. And the next two options are completely different shapes. So this is going to play with our pitch momentarily and then go back to normal and then repeat that pattern. And the next option right here, it's the exact same thing, but the mirror image of it. So what this is meant to mimic is as if our vinyl record is completely warped, whereas these last two options here are supposed to mimic as if there's a tiny bump in one section of the record. Now to control the speed at which this effect occurs, that's what the RPM section over here is for. Just like a typical turntable, the RPM section here is supposed to represent the speed at which it plays. Right now it's set to 45 revolutions per minute, but if I want to slow this effect down, if I set it to 33, now it happens less often, and if I set it to 78, now it's happening in our sound more and more often. And lastly, we have the mono stereo switch, pretty self-explanatory, as well as the input and the output, again self-explanatory. To me, the most useful features in this plugin, the year section down here, just so we can quickly remove some of the frequencies in our sample and have it feel very lo-fi, or if we want to make room for some of the other instruments that we want to include later on. As well, the warp feature, and this is pretty useful as well, just a quick way to introduce some vibrato into our sounds. And there you go guys, hopefully this has cleared up what iZotope vinyl actually does. Leave a comment down below, let me know which one of these features you like to use the most in your beats. While you're at it, please like and subscribe. My free drum kit is available as always in the description box below, and I will see you guys next Tuesday.